going live. Here it comes. Sometimes it turns on before it says we're live. We're here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dulcimoon Talk number 26. Um, I'm Erin Mae, and I get to be the host of the conversation today. And I'm here with Linda Weber Collins from Tallahassee, Florida. And I am delighted to be talking with you about your whole life in music because you have had a whole life of musicality, of exploration, and of sort of general creativity that I so admire. So I can't wait to dive into this conversation with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thanks. This
So
is a
we like
thrill
to
for
start at the
me.
beginning with how did you get into music? How did you get into the dulcimer? What's your journey been like?
Well, music, first of all, generally in music, I got into it as a child. Um, they made me wait until I was 7 before I could take piano lessons. I was really eager, but they would not
Wow.
let me start. Well, pianos don't come in different sizes, like
Well,
violin.
it's true.
Right. So the piano teacher said, no, I had to be 7. But before that, I was singing in the church choir.
Wow.
And yeah, my mother was a church organist. She became the church organist late in life. She wanted to study music when she was young and came from a poor family and wasn't able to do that. And
Hmm.
so in midlife, she started studying to play the pipe organ, and she did, and she played all the pedals. Even though she was only 5'2", she could play the full set of pipe organ pedals.
That's
She'd have to
amazing.
twist and nearly fall off the bench to do it. But so we had an organ in the house and a piano, and my grandmother had sung in her church choir. They for many, many years. I think at 25 years, they gave her some kind of an award, if you can imagine. And she
Wow.
still kept going. She wasn't quitting. So there was music around me. And then I started, as I say, studying piano at the age of 7. And then I had the opportunity when I was 12 to take another instrument through the school system. And this was in Western New York, where I was raised, in a little town called East Aurora. And I chose the cello and
Oh,
started learning cello and playing in orchestra. And when I moved to Florida with my family when I was 16, I started playing with the Fort Myers Symphony Orchestra as well as with the youth orchestra. So I had a lot of music in my life, and then
wow.
went off to music school at Stetson initially. And then I transferred to Florida State University, where I completed my studies. And so I did both instruments, which was rough. Eventually, I think at the last year, I dropped the piano because I just wasn't keeping up with both instruments.
Yeah. Were you a performance major?
No, I I was not a performance major. I wasn't good enough to be a performance major, or should I say I didn't practice enough. That's probably more accurate.
I
Maybe
wasn't
mostly
committed
accurate.
enough. That's how I felt. I was like, I am not committed enough to be a
Not
performance
committed.
major.
That's the term. Yes. And so but I didn't want to teach in the school system, so I didn't know really what to do. And at the time, music therapy was only in these really horrible situations with severely disabled people that were locked up in hospital settings, and it just broke my heart to even set foot in those places. So music therapy, which would have been a good fit if it had been like it is now,
Yeah.
was not a fit for me then. And so at one point, this is a very funny story, I decided I'd try music history. So,
Ooh.
and I was the worst music history major in the history of school. And they'd play something, and I'd hum the parts, and I'd say, "Oh yeah," I could remember playing it on the cello, playing it in the orchestra. And who wrote it? No clue. No
And what
clue.
era? No idea.
So, but I got to study German for a couple of semesters because you had to have German if you were a music history major. So eventually I ended up being a music education major. And really I was not equipped to go into the public schools at that time. I did my internship, and those kids were so rough on me. It was just a miserable experience. They had confidence that I totally lacked. And
Oh,
and and they made fun of me. I was a bit of a hippie at the time, and they'd make fun of my clothes and everything. So, and then I got married, and my husband didn't want me working. So it all went away.
uh-huh.
He wanted me at home. And but I was always interested in folk music. Anytime I listened to folk musicians, I remember in Stetson, my dear friend Larry introducing me, um, to folk music, and Joni Mitchell in particular. That was the year of Joni Mitchell, and so I always wanted to get up there and sing with a band. So eventually I started playing guitar and eventually found my way to the dulcimer.
Wow. What was
Yeah.
your introduction to the dulcimer?
Oh, it was the summer of 1975, and I had been backpacking with my husband in the Rocky Mountains. And we came down into Aspen and spent a few days there. My husband had hurt his leg, his knee, and we needed to rest. And so we were in Aspen, and as he was feeling a bit better, we ventured outside and we came upon a duo playing in the square and or on the street. I don't know if it was really a square, but on the street. It was a young man and his grandfather. And the young
Wow.
man was on guitar, and the grandfather was playing mountain dulcimer. And it was the most magical sound I had ever heard. I fell in love right then. And at the time, there was someone here in Tallahassee who was building dulcimers. And so I came back and I excitedly got in touch with this person only to learn that he had really given up making dulcimers and he was now building harps.
Oh,
And so, and
what a
then
disappointment.
I know, and then the following year we bought a piece of land and started cutting down trees with our hatchets, and I designed a house, and the next thing you know, we were living on the land in a tent, and we were digging the footers with shovels and cooking on a camp stove, and it took over my life for almost 2 years, the process of building this house that I still live in.
Wow.
2.5 stories high and with all kinds of special features. And so at that point, I started having children. So we weren't leaving town. We weren't going up to the mountains. And so the dulcimer sort of went into the background. And then by the time I had 3 young children, we moved to Ireland. And we went there in 1984 and then again in 85, thinking we would stay for the summer. And we didn't come back for 10 years.
Wow. Ha- Having just spent a couple of months in Scotland, I can understand how the not coming back happens. It was really hard to leave.
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. The main thing is that we were looking for a place where our children could be educated because they had been in Montessori schools, and when the eldest was ready to go into a public school, elementary school, it was not a good situation here. And my husband kind of wanted to put me and the kids somewhere on the sidelines. And he thought Ireland would be a good place to do that because none of the men were washing dishes. But what he didn't know is that the women were running the whole country. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, so we put the oldest one in the local school, and he loved it. And it was such a wonderful place, family centered and just open and welcoming and warm and just what you would like. And you
What
could be
part of
safe
Ireland
there.
were you in?
Sorry?
What part of Ireland?
Oh, County Cork. County
That's
Cork.
the southern part, is that right?
Yes, southern. Uh-huh. Southern and a bit toward the west. A little
Yeah.
further is over to the west is Kerry, which is where the
Hmm.
highest mountains of Ireland are. And
Oh,
I went hill walking with a club there, and
wow. Uh-huh.
I climbed the highest mountains in Ireland. We were planning to do 7 peaks in a row in one day. And we were on the fourth one, which was the highest one, when a squall came up. It was March. A squall
Oh,
came up, and we were supposed to be walking across an arete, and the wind was so strong it was lifting us up off our feet completely.
oh,
So we had to hang to the side, but we couldn't just wait for the squall to go away because it was really, really cold, you
oh.
know. So we had to keep moving, and it was quite an adventure.
It sounds
And
like an adventure. It sounds like the
yeah,
kind of adventure that I'm not sure I want to have.
oh, it was. We ended up hanging on off the side of the mountain with 1,000-foot drop below us.
Oh my
And
goodness.
one of the leaders saying, "Now give me your right hand and put your right hand on this rock. Now bring your left foot over here." I mean, it
Oh,
was just unbelievable, unbelievable. And I just, when we got down and we always went to the pub, and you get dry and you have your hot whiskey. And I said to the guys, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I can't do anything scarier than what we did today. That's my limit. And they started laughing. And I said, what are you laughing for? Oh, well, we've been walking these mountains for over 20 years, and that's the scariest thing we've ever encountered. You've already done
you've
it.
already done the scariest thing. You'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So Ireland was a wonderful place to live and to raise my children and to do the
yeah.
walks and all of that. And then when I came back, I was in a car accident and broke a vertebra and got a whiplash, and I couldn't turn my hand around to play the guitar anymore. It
Uh-huh.
was impacting the nerves of my hand. And someone that I knew someone else whose ex-husband had left a mountain dulcimer hanging on the wall where it had been for 30 years. And so I got hold of this thing, and it didn't even I think it had one string on it. I had to buy a book to figure out how to string it. And I strung it
Oh my
up, and
goodness.
I'm walking up the frets, here in the scale. And I got to the octave, to the seventh fret, and it was a half tone sharp.
Oh, oh.
It's like, this is not playable, right? It was an absolute mess, and it was made from pieces of plywood that were butted together. Somebody's
Uh-huh.
Uncle Joe made it in a cabin out
Yeah,
back,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that kind of thing. But we ended up discovering that it was just that the bridge was in the wrong place. And so we cut
Oh,
off the bridge, and we got a movable bridge, and we put it in there, and I started to learn to play. And 6 months later, I performed at the Florida Folk Festival.
wow.
That was the start, and that was in the late 90s. That was in the late 90s. So I
So,
finally got to play. It was more than 20 years later that I
yeah.
finally got to start playing.
Wow. I love that it just kind of stayed in the back of your mind.
It was
And
there. Yeah, it
yeah,
was in the back of my mind.
I hear that kind of thing often from people that like they're just things that we're introduced to, and there's a little spark that happens in our minds, but the timing isn't right yet for that spark to ignite. And it's so beautiful to me when eventually the intersection of, and for you it was like a bit of a crisis, like a car accident, that a bit of
Right.
something awful happens, and it
Yes,
just is like the thing that's needed to ignite that spark that's been waiting the whole time.
that's right. So from the beginning, my playing dulcimer was really a therapy choice.
Yeah,
It was music therapy in action. It's what it
that's
really
uh-huh,
was. And this is
uh-huh.
what led to my being so involved. Eventually, I discovered I had a spinal cord condition, and I was disabled completely. I was homebound for a decade. And and what I learned as I was getting better, I learned how to play in using the techniques that had been taught to me by all these medical professionals who were helping me.
Mm,
And that's what I put into my class where I teach how to be secure, how to be comfortable, and how to avoid injuring yourself. Because
yeah,
music is repetitive motion. When you
it
play
sure
music,
is.
it's repetitive motion. And we don't tend to think of it as something like an athletic event where we should think about our form, but really we should when we're
And
playing
our
an instrument.
warm-ups and our, yeah. My
Yeah.
mom is a physical therapist, and
Ah,
so I am always kind of thinking in the back of my mind, like, what would my mom be saying right now? Like, what do I need to make an adjustment to? And
right.
what am
Right.
I not paying attention to? Because I also, like, for me, I can definitely start playing my instrument and just get totally lost in the music and lose all sense of sort of my own physical awareness to the point where it's like I'm sitting here for 4 or 5 hours and I haven't thought of getting up to go to the bathroom or to like nothing. It's all just gone. And then I'm like, I haven't had enough to drink. I'm very hungry. I really need to pee. And wow, my shoulder hurts. What have I just done to myself, you know?
That is so true. That is so true. Yeah. It can really, music can take us over, and that's a wonderful thing. But losing awareness of our bodies and what we're doing with our bodies comes with a price.
Yeah, yeah. Which is why I think it's really important to have the like very mindful thinking it through at a moment when you're not lost in the music so that hopefully it helps you like hold on to those principles.
Yes, yes. I think what really sets a person up for success and for being able to play as much as they want for as long as they want is at the very beginning to focus on how you're sitting, how you're using your arms and what your wrist position is. And all those details that later on you wish that you were doing it differently, but by then you've got a bad habit and
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to change. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen so many people who do things with their wrists that the wrist is just not meant to do.
Right.
It's only a matter of time until there's going to be a problem. And I hate to see that. I hate to
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah.
So people who come to me for lessons, they really learn about ergonomics,
That's
whether they
wonderful.
want to or not, whether they think it's
Right.
important or not.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's really important and to have had the opportunity for you because of your other physical things to like have the training with professionals to help you understand
right.
how
Right.
to use
And
your
that
body well
training
to
and that training continues. I'm having personal sessions twice a week now with a Pilates trainer, and she has helped me become much more aware of my shoulders and neck.
mm,
That's one
mhm,
thing, just one
mm,
thing out of what she's been doing. But there's always more that we can learn, and it's really a a gap in our education system that we don't learn how to deal with stress. We don't learn about, how to feed ourselves well, how to make a life that works. I mean, there's all these skills that we don't ever get exposed to. We memorize facts instead. Really,
yeah.
what does it take to make a good life? That should be what we're teaching.
Yeah.
What does it
That
take to
just
make
gives
a
me
good life?
goosebumps, Linda.
Ah,
Yeah.
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 And for me, being creative is a really, really basic thing. From the time I was a kid, I always wanted to make things.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
luckily, my mother was aware of that. And so I'd get the wood burning kit and I'd get the kits with the that you
Like
I,
embroidery and cross
embroidery
stitching and
kits, yeah,
yes.
yeah, all these different things. And so I was always given a chance, and she taught me how to knit, she taught me how to sew, all these kinds of things. And over time, those things kind of went into the background, like you were saying, they're in the
Mhm.
background. But then when I was in Ireland, and it gets so dark in the winter, it
Mhm.
never gets completely light. And
Mhm.
I kept putting in light fixtures all over this house that I was renting, more light, more light, more light. And then you're building fires all day long because fires were the only way that we had any heat. We had four
Uh-huh.
fireplaces. And so
Wow.
you're building fires all the time. And at night, you're sitting by the fireplace, just trying to keep yourself energized. And there was no internet. There were two channels on the TV. And so I picked up knitting again. I hadn't knitted in quite a while. Well, what are you going to knit
Oh,
when you're in Florida? That's what I'm discovering these
well,
days.
that is fair. You don't need a lot of warm hats and socks in Florida, do you?
No, you don't. But you need little shawls to put around your neck and shoulders when the air conditioning is too cold.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so for me, being creative, and it's a nice working with actual things. It's a nice balance to music because music, you play it and it's gone.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, you might record it, but there's something about having a creative endeavor that you create something that you can touch and
Hmm.
that you can show people, that you can wear. That's that's really very, very nice. Instead of this, I'm practicing. Now that I wanted to mention that because people have said to me what an advantage I had learning classical music. And it's true. I mean, I I learned a lot of skills which served
Yeah.
me well, but music wasn't fun.
Oh,
It was it
oh,
was
that's just heartbreaking to me because
I know.
yeah, right? Like,
I
I feel
know.
like the emphasis in classical training is so little on your own enjoyment of the music. Even though I believe so strongly that people like Beethoven did not compose because it was drudgery for them. I'm pretty sure
Right.
that
Right.
there was that spark of joy in their lives, but for some reason, the way it gets passed down and taught, it's just about like,
It's
I don't
about
know.
here's what I was told. You practice your lesson, you learn what's on the page, and if you do anything else, we'll stop the lessons.
Wow.
I didn't think I could ever play by ear because I was never allowed the opportunity to do that. And I had
Wow.
to go to a new instrument when I can play by ear on the dulcimer, but not so well on the piano. I can pick out a
That's
melody,
that's
right?
interesting because I feel really similarly. On the piano, I can sight read and I
Right.
can read music really quickly. And then I also feel like memorizing is almost impossible on the piano. I just like really struggle with memorization on the piano. I really struggle to just sit down and play something on the piano. And on my dulcimer, it's like I'm constantly noodling around.
Yeah, yeah. I have these friends here in Tallahassee, Craig and Adrian, who are this group called Hot Tamale. And Craig played with me on Quarantune a year plus ago. And the thing about Craig is that music is so joyful. They are so joyful with the music that they do.
Wow.
And it really, playing with them has made me aware of the fact that joy was taken from me.
Mm-hmm.
Joy in music was taken from me, and therefore I needed to find a way to bring the joy back.
Yeah. Yeah. So what
And
was it? How did you do it? How did you bring the joy back?
it's a work in process, in progress.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a work in progress. It's partly through my students. Now that I have my own piano students, it's partly in the way that I work with them. One of
Wow.
one of the
Oh,
best things that they love to do is to improvise. And I work with a set of books as our basis that includes improvising and includes modulation and includes an understanding of structure and all of the things that you would need, let's say, to play from a lead sheet, right? Which I
yeah.
never learned any of that.
Hmm.
Right? But this series introduces it to them at a young age, and so a lot of times what we'll do is we'll sit down and we're going to do this improvising exercise again because it's joyful. They're not struggling to read the notation and to think of the rhythm and that what and they just get to play with me and do their own thing. And that is the part that's joyful. Now, that doesn't mean that the other stuff isn't important, but you don't
Right.
want to let go of the joy.
Yeah, I often feel like, a lot of my work as a teacher is to help people hone in their technique. But the
Mhm.
goal of learning all the technique is so that you can go play like yourself. You can make the music your own. You can play traditional music or popular music or classical music. I don't care what kind of music you play. It doesn't matter. Like, here's some of the techniques that you can use to apply. And we have to study the techniques because that becomes the toolbox of things we can reach for.
Right.
And if we only have one technique, then our toolbox is really limited and then our creativity is a little bit stifled. But the point of playing music is not the technique.
No, but you're right. I don't say toolbox, I use tool belt for some reason, but the same idea. How many tools do you have on your tool belt? And
Yeah.
and that's what technique gives you. It gives you the tools that you can then use to do whatever you choose to do with them. But if
Yeah.
you don't have the tools, you're stuck.
Hmm.
You're stuck.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you'd want to have the ability to read notation, perhaps,
Yeah,
depending on what someone wants to do. Although on the dulcimer we do have tab, but it's nice to know a little bit about notation. You certainly need to know,
for sure.
your note values, for example. You got to look up for those. So which tools are going to be the most important for any given student?
Yeah,
And that depends upon what their personal goals are.
right.
And they may not have really thought what their goals are, but I always ask,
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
do you want to do with music? Why are you
Hmm.
here?
Hmm.
I had
Yeah.
an 80-something-year-old woman who, when I asked her that question, she said, I want to be able to sit on the porch and pick out the tunes that my husband and I used to sing together in the evenings.
Oh,
Isn't that the sweetest thing?
that is the sweetest thing.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
You never know what kind of answer you're going to get when you ask that question. So
Hmm.
it took us into a certain genre of music, and yeah, yeah, it really that one really impacted me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That answer.
Hmm.
Now, I'm thankful, very thankful for my classical background, and it's what has enabled me to be able to do one of the things that I most want to do with the dulcimer, which is I want to expand the repertoire that's
Hmm.
available for people who are playing dulcimer and
Hmm.
who maybe can't take it from the standard notation and put it on the instrument. So I want to be able to arrange a lot more music onto the instrument and put it in tabs so that people who haven't got the training,
Yeah.
can play a bunch of different stuff. And I really started working with this a lot during the pandemic when I was working on this book of music from the Scottish Isles, and I called it the mainland, the mainland of Scotland. And I had been gifted a collection of incredible resource materials.
Mm.
And I delved into those things and looked at hundreds. I examined hundreds and hundreds of tunes to find ones that had something that kind of suggested the dulcimer as a unique way of performing that tune and put that together. So that was sort of the start of my getting away from just the arranging for your students to
Uh-huh.
expanding the repertoire.
Yeah. I was just thinking, well, there's your music history degree, even though that's not what they were trying to teach you,
No, it
right? They
wasn't.
were trying to teach you what is Baroque and what is classical. But to me, like, really, music history is like finding sources. It's tracing through those sources, it's connecting the pieces between
Mhm.
them, which gets me all excited. And I'm like, yes, we need more of this,
Mhm.
kind of going through the historic records that we have and then trying to sort of translate
Right.
that into the present day and the instruments that we're playing and bringing more different kinds of repertoire. It's all just, I don't know, it's beautiful and important. And it
Yeah.
excites me that we're in a place with the mountain dulcimer where we are kind of, we're like on the frontier edge of all of it. We're just still
Mhm.
exploring what is possible, and the
Right.
instruments are changing, and people are just trying all kinds of stuff right now on the instrument, and I think it's magical and cool, and I'm glad
It
you're
really is. It
paying
really is.
into that
And some of
too.
those research materials I was working with dated from the 1700s. I mean, they went
Wow.
way back.
Yeah.
And then you play, arranging music from certain places, like from these little islands out in the Atlantic.
Hmm.
And because of having been in Ireland, I know what it's like to be out in those wild places in the
Yeah.
strong gale and all of that. I was locked up at home during the pandemic, but I was gone to Scotland and the Isles. In my
Oh, I
mind, I
love
was gone.
that.
It was such a wonderful experience to do that, to really touch into that. And of course, I still have great love for Irish music, having spent those years there.
Yeah.
But the Scottish music was new for me.
Yeah, and it is not the same,
No,
Scottish and Irish music. They kind
no,
of get lumped together here, but they're very different sets of repertoire and
yes.
styles and
Yes,
things.
indeed. I once had the opportunity, and I did, to do a long weekend workshop up in the Catskill Mountains of New York, on Scottish cello playing.
Ooh.
And it was really, really special, to learn these Scottish
Yeah.
tunes on the cello, because I'd only played the cello for classical things. And so
Mhm.
to branch out into playing Scottish music. And the thing that's really cool about that, one of the things is that the cello was a traditional instrument in Scotland, and it provided the rhythm.
Huh.
It provided the
Yeah.
rhythm. And orchestral string players are not well known for rhythm.
Interesting. Uh-huh. But man, the like folk cello, I've heard a few bluegrass bands that incorporate cello, and they're doing all this like really cool, groovy, rhythmic stuff, and it's so fun.
Oh, well, here's one for you. It's Alistair Fraser, who is a fiddler, and
Yeah,
and and um and Natalie Haas
I love them.
together. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
together. So that was sort of what I had heard in the past, and of course they don't just play traditionally; they also do these amazing arrangements, and it fits in with my main interest, which I call chamber folk.
Oh, what a lovely name.
Yeah,
Chamber folk.
chamber
Yeah.
folk. You take that sensibility of chamber music, but you apply it to folk instruments. So you
Hmm.
can arrange and you can do various things, but it's in a different genre. It's in the folk genre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a really delightful conversation with Carmen Amrein in Germany about some of the German traditional music, and some of the German folk music is really like that. It's like it's folk music, but it's also kind of written and arranged, and it's got a form that you follow. And so it is kind of this like somewhere in between what we think of as like completely improvisational or unplanned or just sit and play the tune over and over again for someone to dance to, uh, versus the like really formal classical setting with a conductor and the old,
Yeah, it's
written
somewhere
music.
in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, somewhere in the
Yeah.
middle. And it's
I
really
find that
fun.
like that merging between classical and folk music, like I am seeing it in some places, but I just wish we could see more of an appreciation in the higher institutions for the folk music traditions and also in the folk music communities. Stephen Seifert and I one time were having a conversation, and he said, you know, a lot of folk musicians hide the fact that they've had formal music education training because there's this sense of like, oh, you're going to be have too much ego or be arrogant, or you're gonna like look at our folk music and you're gonna ruin it because you're gonna bring in this sensibility from the classical. And it's like, no, I actually think that they merge quite well if we
They
can.
can. They
Yeah,
can.
if we
If
can
the
have mutual appreciation
Yes,
for
yes.
the
My husband was a musician who didn't have respect for the folk tradition. He used to make a joke about people playing for their own amazement as opposed to playing for their own amusement, right? Yeah, it was hard for me to get into the folk world until he was no longer part of the picture.
wow.
Which is
Yeah.
really kind of weird because he was a trombonist and he played shows on Miami Beach. So it wasn't like, he was classical completely,
Uh-huh.
but he
Uh-huh.
had this idea of a professional musician
Mhm.
versus an amateur, right?
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
amateur didn't get respect. I thought it was kind of
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah.
So you can have people who bring an attitude like that. Yes, it's possible. But it's
Mhm.
also possible to bring your understanding and knowledge that you've gained in other areas and bring it in and still be aware that you're learning something new.
Yeah.
I had never used a pick.
Uh-huh.
I never knew anything about strumming. I sat in
Uh-huh.
my first workshop with Steve Seifert and I thought, why is he doing this on every beat? One, two. It's like it's wasteful. I wanted to go one, two, three, right? I didn't
Uh-huh.
understand how strumming, if you're on the beat with your strong stroke, that leaves the other stroke for the notes that are going to fit in later
Mhm.
rhythmically, but your arm doesn't change. Well, I didn't know that and nobody told me. But I sat right up there in the front row of Steve's workshop and I was going back and forth because it made more sense to me, right?
Uh-huh.
So I was a beginner, and when I first sat down with the dulcimer, I didn't know any dulcimer players, and so I was just trying to figure it out. And
Yeah.
luckily, I found my way to Steve and some other wonderful players that made it such a difference for me.
Yeah.
And Maddie
Yeah.
McNeil was somebody who really had a big influence on me.
Yeah. Oh, she was wonderful.
She really was. She said something to me one time that I've remembered ever since, and I've shared with a lot of people. We were talking about people getting nervous when they're performing, which is it comes around.
Common.
It doesn't matter what kind of music you play. Sooner or
Yep.
later, you're going to have a conversation about nerves when you're performing. And what she said to me is this. She said, and she had been told this, and I can't remember if she mentioned to me who told her, but she repeated it to me and she said, what you do is you think that there is someone in that audience who really, really needs to hear what you're going to present, and you play for them.
Mhm.
That's what she said.
Mhm. Mhm. That
And
was
it's
my philosophy when I
special.
entered the contest. It's like I'm not playing for the judges. I don't know who they are. I don't know how they're going to feel about what I play. But I bet there's somebody listening to this contest for whom whatever I'm playing is exactly what they need right now. I'm playing to that person.
Well,
The
there you
judges
go.
can do
How did
whatever they want. You know, the judges are whatever. They're over there. They're doing their thing, but somebody in this room is going to connect to whatever I'm doing in
Okay,
that
so I
time.
have to ask you this question. How did you get so smart when you were still so young?
I don't know.
Where did that
I think I
wisdom?
had good mentors all along the way who helped me see past some of the
Hmm.
things. Um, but I don't know how I figured that one out. I started entering the contest with that, and then I would talk to people who were so stressed out because
Hmm.
they were trying to play for the judges. And they were so stressed out about it. And I was like, I'm not playing for the judges. That would be crazy. um,
Well, good for
yeah.
you. You had it figured. You had it
And
figured out. It was new when Maddie said it to me, and I was well, I was 50 when she said that
yeah.
to me.
Well, I think you had probably been trained that you were.
One thing about classical music that I do not appreciate is that you're expected to play a piece note perfect.
Mhm, mhm,
There was always the recital,
mhm.
and
There's like a
and
concrete, this is the right way.
that there's not only yeah, and if you make a mistake, it's tragedy. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that
We're
doesn't feel
not.
very human, does it?
No, no. I mean, I don't think I'm ever gonna play at some place that's so highfalutin and fancy that every note has to be right.
Mhm.
Well, with that attitude, I certainly won't, will I?
Or
But
that the audience will know the difference.
right, right. So,
Yeah.
so I had a counselor at one point who used to say to me, and this was when I was starting to really become more known in the dulcimer world, and he said, "Well, how many mistakes are you going to allow yourself to have?" I just looked at him like, "What kind of a question is that?" Right? And he said, "Well, a dozen." Oh gosh, no. Well, how about half a dozen? Oh, no, no, no. He finally got me to agree that I could make two or three.
Uh-huh.
And that was a huge improvement over my other attitude, which was that it had
Right,
to
of
be
like
perfect.
absolute perfection is the only
Mhm.
acceptable. Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
Oof. Yeah, I bet there's a lot of recovering perfectionists among us dulcimer players. And
yes,
I think that one of the beauties of folk music is that it can begin to help us move past the perfectionist way and discover that, two or three ways of making these sounds can all be beautiful.
right, right.
Mhm.
One thing that has helped so much for me is a book that's been around for a long time called The Artist's Way.
I love The Artist's Way. It's
Yeah,
probably sitting on my desk right
there you
now.
go. And because she talks about the recovering artist, and her word, it's artist, is not just somebody who does, visual art. There could be a writer, a
Mhm.
musician, or whatever. But she talks about various ways. There you are. That's the
It
book.
is. It's sitting on my
Yeah,
desk, yes.
there you are. Mine's too far. I can't quite reach it from here. But I actually, several years ago, formed a small group of friends who are all creatives, and we meet every couple of weeks and encourage each other in our creative endeavors. One of the women is a poet, and she is working on a project right now where her poetry is has been used to create a digitally formed opera by not by her, but by a musician who's also a physicist, and he created
Wow.
this digital soundscape that's like an opera using the spoken words of her poem, and now they're turning it into a film. They're actually, I mean, this is
Wow.
just amazing. Another of the people in the group is an artist and a musician, and she's a jewelry maker. That's just amazing stuff. Another of the people is a writer, and she had written some things like for her family, kind of things,
Yeah.
stories of people in the family. She's just now finishing her first novel.
Amazing. Man, when we
And
can
then
get out
there's
of our own
me.
way.
Yeah, and then there's me, and what I've been doing primarily is working on arrangements and that
Yeah.
repertoire that I
Oh,
mentioned, and
I
teaching.
love it.
So we're all doing our creative projects and supporting each other using the techniques and the ideas from that book, The Artist's Way. And I can't recommend it highly enough. I just, every time I read it, I just, of course, it's
Yeah.
like, it doesn't matter how many different times I've been through and underlined and made notes in the margins. I always find something else that's
Yeah.
meaningful.
I went through it with a group on Zoom, which was actually one of the first things I ever did on Zoom, way before the pandemic started, when Zoom was like brand new. And it was what inspired me that it might be possible to do group dulcimer classes on Zoom by having the experience of interacting with the other people in the group in this creative way, it was
Huh?
like for me it was simultaneously the spark of the inspiration from the actual practices in the book, but it was also like
The
this could be
experience
a thing
itself.
that's
Yeah.
possible. And then a year and a half later, the pandemic led us all into this Zoom community. And I can look all the way back and go, it was the Artist's Way book group that was the catalyst for maybe it could be possible to do group things on Zoom that eventually led us into this place where we're doing festivals on Zoom, like
Right.
Quarantine coming up in 2 weeks
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
Dulcimoon in January.
Yeah.
Like here we are.
Yep.
So yeah,
It
I
is
think it was a really powerful thing in my life as well.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just don't know. When you start loosening up the way that you're thinking,
Mhm.
what can come in. And that's one of the reasons I love to knit. And you're a knitter too, right?
I'm a knitter too. Yeah.
But do you find this to be true? I find when I'm knitting, of course, there's on certain things, there's a mantra that goes with it. You know, it might be a knit to, yarn over, do da 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 da. You know, you have this little phrase that you think over and over and over.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But other times it's you don't have to concentrate as much. And
Yeah.
what I find is when I'm sitting there and I'm knitting, I get engaged enough, but not completely. So then stuff just starts coming in from outside.
Right?
These ideas just start dropping in, and it's the most wonderful experience.
Hmm.
The inspiration, it's not like you're sitting there trying to think of something, right? You're not. You're just
Right, which
sitting there and
rarely works. I do
yeah,
not usually have good ideas when I'm trying to think of them.
my best ideas come when I'm knitting, I swear.
Wow. Oh, I love that. Aw.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Linda, it's becoming clear to me that we could talk and talk and talk for hours and hours and hours. And I hope that our paths cross someday and we can like sit and knit and have a cup of tea and play our dulcimers together in real life. But
Me
I don't want to
too.
keep you all day. So I'm gonna work on landing the ship and wrap us up here.
Okay.
Is there anything you want to tell folks about in terms of like your website, your resources available, how to
Right.
connect with you?
Okay. Well, you can find me at cabinhillmusic.com, which actually leads to cabinhillstudios.com, where I used to have, at one point, there was a local art show that had to be on because of the pandemic. We all had to do websites. And so I used to have all my knitwear and jewelry up there, but it got too hard to maintain my inventory to see what had gone out to art galleries and what I still had here. And if I didn't have it here, it couldn't be on the website. Anyway, so now only music is up at the moment, but it's cabinhillstudios.com and it kind of
Excellent.
has everything listed that I'm going to be doing right
Yeah,
there.
great.
And hopefully
We're
I'll
gonna be
see a
involved
bunch
in
of
the
folks.
corn.
We'll both be
Uh-huh.
at Quarantine. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
good, good. Well, we'll see you there then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you so much for this. It's been fun.
Oh, thank you, Linda. It's so lovely to get to know more of your story, and so thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome.
All right, folks, we'll see you next time for another Dulcimoon Talk. Bye.
Bye.